In this video, I'm going to summarize the sales data set to show how much revenue is coming from the top 10% customers, top 20%, and compare that against the bottom 10% and bottom 20%. But I'm going to show you how you can set this up so you can split this however you want. So the first thing I'm going to do is create a pivot table. So I'm just going to select anywhere in my data set, go to the Insert tab, click on Pivot Table, and it's automatically going to detect my range. I'm going to leave the default settings as New Worksheet, hit OK, and I've got my pivot table set up here. And now what I'm going to do is grab the customer name into the rows section and the total sales into the values section. And so now I've already got a summary by customer by sales, because I don't want to analyze the data set just by looking at the raw numbers, just because in case a customer has multiple invoices, multiple payments, I want to sum that up in a pivot table before I start my analysis, because I want to look at actual totals by customer first. And now what I'm going to do is insert a couple of rows here just to add some more space. And now I'm going to create some different headings. So one is going to be my cutoff amount based on whether they fall in the top 10%, 20%, whatever the case may be, and the total dollars that fall within the range, and the percentage of the total. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn off my grand total here because I don't want to include that in here. So I'm going to right click, remove grand total, just so I just have the numbers that I want to look at are relating to the customer, the sales by customer. So for the different options, the different cutoff points I'm going to have, I'm going to look at top 10%, top 20%, bottom 20%, and bottom 10%. And so to make this work, I'm going to use the percentile function to tell me what the different cutoff points should be. So I'm going to use the percentile function. So there's a lot of different ones you can choose from. I'm just going to use the normal percentile one. And for the array, I'm going to select this entire range. So I'm going to go B9 to, let's say, B1000. It doesn't really matter. I'm just going to make it large enough so it's not an issue. And for the percentile, this K value, I'm going to type in 0.9, so 90%. So the top 90%, so it's greater than 90% of the values. So in other words, it's going to be the top 10% remaining. So that's going to tell me the cutoff point is 347.911. Now, what I'm going to do is freeze this range, B9 to B1000, and copy this down. And here I'm going to type in 0.8. So 276.338. So as you can see, it's a lower amount because now it's encompassing the top 20%. Copy this down. And when we're looking at the bottom 20%, now I can set it to 20%. And for the bottom 10%, set it to 10%. So as you can see now, we can see these different cutoff points and how this is all going to work. We're basically looking at the different buckets to say if it's greater than or equal to this amount, then it belongs in the top 10%. So to set that up, I'm going to use the SUMIF calculation. And for the range, I'm going to select this one again. So B9 through to B1000. For my criteria, I'm going to open up quotes and type in greater than or equal to, because I'm going to include that amount, and now join this with an ampersand to say, look at this value here, and then if it falls within that range, then we're going to sum those values up. So B9 to B1000 again. And so let's freeze this. So when I copy these formulas down, it'll be really easy to adjust them. So that tells me this is how much sales belong to these customers. So if I want to look at a percentage of total, now I can take this amount and divide it by my grand total. And in this case, I'm just going to sum these values, B9 to B1000, and freeze that as well. And so I can see that my top 10% of customers accounted for about 21% of my total sales. So now let's copy this down to these other options here, these other cutoff points. So if I'm looking at the top 20%, now that includes $35,072. And so as a percentage of my total, now that's 37%. So this is including this bucket here, the top 20%, because obviously the top 20% is going to include the top 20%. So just keep that in mind when you're setting up these cutoff points of what you're specifically including. So if you just wanted to know the difference between just specifically that gap between the top 20 and the top 10, then you take the difference between these amounts to say that, okay, 35 minus 19, so about 16,000 would fall within that range of 20% through to just beyond 10%. So if we're looking at top 20%, we're including all the 20%, and that's going to include this bucket here. So just keep that in mind if you're doing this analysis. So now I'm going to copy this down, and for the bottom 20%, I want to change this so it's the less than or equal to indicator, because I want to look at sales below this amount, this 101.902. So that tells me 7,894. So obviously a very small amount, because these are smaller customers, and they're accounting for 8% of sales. I'm going to copy this down, and this tells me the bottom 10% account for 3,184 sales. If I copy this down, that's 3%. And again, similarly, here the bottom 20%, this is going to include this bottom 10% as well. So now I can do an analysis to see, how much sales are coming from these different sections of my customer base, how much my largest customers are contributing versus my smallest. And just to give you an idea of how this works, I'm going to do a customer count field here as well to say, how many customers fall within these buckets. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this sum if formula. And what I just need to do is remove this last piece here for this sum range, because I'm only doing a count if. So count if is looking at that range if it meets this criteria. So I'm going to delete this last part. And so it tells me 50 customers fell within that range. And that's because in this data set, I've got 500 customers. So 500 times 10% is going to give me 50. If I'm looking at the top 20%, then it's going to be 100. Same with if I look at the bottom, it's going to be 100 as well, because I'm looking at the bottom 20%. Bottom 10% is going to be 50 customers as well. And so what you could also do at this point is put this into a chart if you wanted to display this data. So if I select this and go to Insert, select Chart, and let's just say select the default clustered column here, and I'm going to select my data to say I just want to compare. I don't want to include the cutoff. I just want to look at the top 20% versus the bottom 20%. So a really common comparison in marketing to look at. And now we've got that set up. Convert this into a chart that's easy to read and summarize these values. So by doing this, it's really easy to set this up with the help of a pivot table to summarize your sales by customer, and then just use that percentile function to determine your cutoff points and then map this out. And obviously you can change these values. As I mentioned before, you just want to adjust these different K values here for the percentile argument. And by doing so, you can make this more dynamic. If you want to focus on the top 5%, bottom 5%, obviously you can just adjust those percentages accordingly. So that's a wrap for this video. If you did like it, please make sure to leave a like and subscribe for more like us. Thanks for watching.